Lieutenant Zexhai stood at the viewing port of the patrol vessel Dominion's Edge, watching the third planet of the Sol system grow larger on the screens. The blue and green world looked peaceful from this distance, but intelligence reports said it was home to over 7 billion creatures called humans. The thought made his scaled skin ripple with mild disgust. "Another primitive species to babysit," muttered Sergeant Major Clicks from behind him. The large reptilian soldier was checking his equipment for the third time that morning. "Why do we always get stuck with the easy jobs?" Zexhai turned away from the viewport and looked at his team. 12 soldiers from different worlds, all veterans of real wars against proper enemies. Now they were being sent to watch over a species that had barely learned to leave their own planet. The humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 5 years ago, and their technology was still crude compared to galactic standards. "The mission briefing said they are emotional and unpredictable," Zexhai said, pulling up the data on his wrist display. "Command wants us to establish an observation post on their 4th planet while the diplomats talk to their leaders." Communications specialist Vorth clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his insect-like species. "Emotional and unpredictable. Just like all the other primitive races we have encountered. They will surrender the moment they see our superior technology." Medic Yila, whose crystalline body reflected the ship's lights in rainbow patterns, hummed softly. "The medical data suggests they feel pain similarly to most galactic species. They should be easy to manage if things go wrong." Zexhai nodded and returned to studying the intelligence reports. The humans had fought wars among themselves for thousands of years, but their weapons were simple. They used kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. Their ships were powered by fusion reactors instead of proper quantum cores. Their military tactics seemed straightforward and predictable. The report showed images of human soldiers. They were bipedal mammals with soft skin and no natural weapons. They covered their bodies with fabric and metal armor that would barely stop a child's training weapon. Most amusing of all, they seemed to form emotional attachments to their fellow soldiers, which made them weak and predictable in combat. "Look at this," Specialist Dorth said, pointing to a video feed on the main screen. "They actually mourn their dead? Can you imagine being so weak that losing a single soldier affects your whole unit?" The other soldiers laughed. In galactic military doctrine, individual soldiers were replaceable resources. Emotional attachment was trained out of recruits early because it led to poor tactical decisions. The humans apparently had never learned this basic lesson. Captain Morthic entered the briefing room, his armored boots clicking against the metal floor. The scarred veteran had fought in 17 major campaigns and had never lost a single engagement. His presence made the younger soldiers stand straighter. "We will establish our base in an abandoned human research station on the 4th planet," he announced. "The humans call it Mars. Intelligence says they evacuated the facility when they detected our approach." Typical primitive behavior. Zexhai pulled up the images of the Mars station. It was a simple collection of metal domes connected by pressurized tunnels. The humans had built it to study their own planet, but the construction was so basic that it looked more like a child's toy than a real military installation. "Sir, what are our rules of engagement?" asked Private Hector, the youngest member of the unit. "Standard first contact protocols," Morthic replied. "We are observers only. The humans are not to be harmed unless they pose a direct threat to galactic security, which they won't because they lack the technology to threaten anything beyond their own solar system." The ship's pilot announced they were approaching Mars orbit. Through the viewports, Zexhai could see the red planet's surface covered with dust and rocks. A few human structures dotted the landscape, but they looked fragile and temporary. The abandoned research station sat in a crater, its solar panels glinting in the weak sunlight. "Prepare for landing," Morthic ordered. "Remember, this is a routine peacekeeping mission. We are dealing with a species that has never seen real military power. Show them our technology and they will cooperate out of fear and respect." The landing was smooth. The station's automated systems had been programmed to accept their ship, suggesting the humans had been expecting some kind of contact. As Zexhai stepped onto the Martian surface, he felt confident this would be the easiest assignment of his career. The human facility was even more primitive up close. The walls were made of simple metal alloys that his weapon could cut through like paper. The life support systems were basic atmospheric processors that would fail under any real stress. The computer networks used outdated quantum encryption that Vorth cracked in less than 10 minutes. "This is almost insulting," Click said as they explored the empty corridors. "Command could have sent a single squad to handle this entire species." Zexhai agreed. The humans had left behind personal items in their rush to evacuate. Pictures of family members, small decorative objects, even food in the refrigeration units. It painted a picture of a species that valued comfort and sentiment over military efficiency. The first week passed without incident. The unit established their equipment and began monitoring human communications. The diplomatic meetings between the Galactic Fleet and Earth's representatives seemed to be going well. The humans were asking for technology and trade agreements. Just like every other primitive species they had encountered, Zexhai began to relax. This really was going to be a simple mission. The humans were exactly what the intelligence reports had predicted: emotional, weak, and easily impressed by superior technology. In a few months, they would be another minor member of the galactic community, contributing resources and accepting guidance from their betters. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be. 3 weeks had passed since the unit established their base on Mars, and Zexhai was beginning to think this mission might actually be boring rather than easy. The daily reports to command were repetitive and dull. Human communications traffic was normal. Their ships moved in predictable patterns around their home planet. The diplomatic meetings continued without any major problems. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was having the worst day of his military career. The young Earth Defense Force officer had been assigned to routine patrol duty around Mars when his sensors detected something that made his blood run cold. Energy signatures that did not match any known human technology were coming from the abandoned research station. "Control this is Patrol 7, Jake spoke into his radio. "I'm reading massive energy spikes from Research Station Alpha. Please confirm all personnel were evacuated." The reply came back immediately. "Patrol 7, all human personnel evacuated 3 weeks ago. Station should be completely empty." Jake stared at his instrument panel. The readings were impossible to ignore. Something was definitely active in that station, and it was not human technology. His training kicked in, and he began following standard first contact protocols. Even though his hands were shaking back at the research station, Specialist Vorth was conducting his daily sensor sweep of the surrounding area. When his equipment detected the approaching human vessel, the insect-like alien immediately reported to Zexhai, who was reviewing supply inventories in what had once been the human command center. "Sir, we have a single human patrol craft approaching from the south," Vorth reported. "Distance is approximately 50 kilometers. And closing slowly." Zexhai looked up from his reports. This was the first time humans had come close to their position. Since they had established the base, he checked the standard procedures for first contact with primitive species. The guidelines were simple and clear: show enough technology to demonstrate superiority, but avoid any actions that might be interpreted as hostile. Activate passive defense screens, he ordered. Begin standard greeting protocols on all human communication frequencies. What happened next would later be analyzed by military experts from dozens of species, but at the time it seemed like a simple misunderstanding. Vorth activated the alien communication system and began transmitting what was intended as a peaceful greeting. The message was broadcast in mathematical sequences that any intelligent species should be able to understand. Jake Morrison received the transmission as a series of electronic pulses that his ship's computer could not decode. The patterns were complex and seemed to be some kind of advanced encryption. His training told him that unknown encrypted communications from a supposedly empty facility probably meant hostile activity. "Control, this is Patrol 7, Jake reported. "I'm receiving coded transmissions from Research Station Alpha. Possible hostile contact." The response from Earth Defense Command was immediate. "Patrol 7, you are authorized to investigate. Proceed with caution and report any threats." Jake felt his heart racing As he approached the research station, his ship's sensors were going crazy with readings he had never seen before. Energy fields that seemed to bend light itself surrounded the facility. Strange geometric patterns appeared on his screens that hurt to look at. Directly from his position in the command center, HFY watched the human vessel approach and felt a growing sense of unease. The ship was crude by galactic standards, but it was moving in patterns that suggested the pilot had military training. More concerning was the fact that the humans seemed to be interpreting their peaceful signals as some kind of threat. "Sir, the human vessel is powering up its weapons systems," Vorth reported. "Primitive kinetic projectiles, but they appear to be targeting our position." HFY felt his first moment of real concern. The intelligence reports had said humans were emotional and unpredictable, but they had also said the species would respond to superior technology with submission. This human pilot was apparently preparing to attack a facility that was obviously beyond his ability to harm. "Increase defensive screen intensity," HFY ordered. "Begin broadcasting surrender demands on all frequencies." Jake Morrison saw the energy fields around the research station suddenly brighten and pulse in ways that made his ship's hull vibrate. The coded transmissions became more frequent and seemed to be coming from multiple sources around the facility his tactical computer identified. What appeared to be weapon signatures powering up the situation was spinning out of control faster than either side could comprehend. Jake was following human military doctrine for dealing with unknown threats, while HFY was following galactic protocols for managing primitive species. Neither set of procedures had been designed for this kind of encounter. "Control, this is Patrol 7, Jake reported. "Station is definitely occupied by hostiles. Energy weapons are powering up, and I'm receiving what appears to be surrender demands." The response from Earth Defense Command changed everything. "Patrol 7, if hostile forces are demanding surrender, you are authorized to engage." "Repeat, you are authorized to engage." Jake armed his ship's weapons and prepared to fire. His training had taught him that when facing unknown technology, the best approach was to strike first and ask questions later. The kinetic projectiles his ship carried were designed to penetrate heavy armor and would hopefully be effective against whatever the aliens were using for defense. From the alien perspective, Jake's actions seemed insane. A primitive vessel with crude weapons was preparing to attack a facility protected by advanced galactic technology. It was like watching a child attack a fortress with a wooden stick. "Sir, the human is actually going to fire on us," Vorth reported in disbelief. "This is unprecedented behavior." HFY made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He activated the station's automated defense systems, intending to disable the human vessel without harming the pilot. It was a standard response designed to demonstrate overwhelming superiority and force immediate surrender. The first exchange of fire lasted less than 30 seconds. Jake's kinetic projectiles struck the alien defensive screens and seemed to disappear into fields of twisted energy. The return fire from the station was a beam of coherent light that passed through his ship's armor like it was made of paper. But Jake Morrison did not surrender. Instead, he performed an evasive maneuver that no galactic tactical computer had ever recorded and continued firing. His ship was damaged but still functional, and he was apparently willing to fight to the death rather than admit defeat. Two more human ships appeared on the horizon, moving at maximum speed toward the research station. Captain Lisa Andrews was leading a quick response team that had been scrambled the moment Jake's first report reached Earth Defense Command. The simple first contact scenario had become a battle, and both sides were beginning to realize they had seriously underestimated their opponents. The news of the Mars incident spread across Earth faster than any government could control it. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting footage of the alien encounter captured by Jake Morrison's ship cameras. The images showed energy weapons and defensive screens that were clearly beyond human technology. Admiral Susan Blake stood in the Pentagon's Situation Room watching the footage for the 100th time. The seasoned military officer had fought in 3 major conflicts, but nothing had prepared her for this. The aliens had technology that made human weapons look like Stone Age tools, yet somehow Jake Morrison had survived the encounter. "Ma'am, we're receiving reports from around the globe," Colonel Tony Marshall said. As he entered the room, Every major military power is mobilizing their forces. The public is demanding action. Susan nodded grimly. She had expected this reaction. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the footage from Mars had shown humanity that they were not alone in the universe. The beings sharing space with them possessed weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. "What's our assessment of enemy capabilities?" she asked. "Intelligence estimates they have at least 30 soldiers on Mars with technology roughly 500 years ahead of ours," Marshall replied. "Their defensive screens can stop our most powerful weapons, and their energy beams can cut through our heaviest armor." Susan studied the tactical displays showing Earth's defensive positions. The human military had been designed to fight other humans, not aliens with impossible technology. Every strategic doctrine would need to be thrown out and rebuilt from scratch. "We can't match their technology," she said. "Finally, so we don't try to match it, we find ways around it." On Mars, Captain Morthick was experiencing his first military crisis in over 20 years. The human response to their defensive actions had been completely unexpected. Instead of surrendering, after seeing superior technology, the humans had reinforced their position and were apparently preparing for extended combat. "Sir, we're detecting massive military movements on the third planet," Vorth reported. "Human forces are mobilizing globally, and their communication traffic suggests they're preparing for war." Morthick stared at the tactical displays in disbelief. According to every military manual in the galactic database, primitive species were supposed to submit when faced with overwhelming technological superiority. The humans were doing the exact opposite. "Send a message to the fleet," he ordered. "Request immediate reinforcement. 2 additional squads should be sufficient to handle this situation." Zexhai watched his commander make the request and felt a growing sense of unease. Something about the human response bothered him. The pilot who had attacked their base could have easily retreated after the first exchange of fire. Instead, he had continued fighting even when his ship was damaged. "Sir, what if they don't surrender?" he asked quietly. Moth looked at him with the kind of expression reserved for very stupid questions. "They will surrender, Zexhai. They have no choice. Their weapons cannot penetrate our defenses, and our technology is centuries ahead of theirs." But even as he spoke the words, Morthick was remembering something that made him uncomfortable. The human pilot had performed maneuvers that the tactical computer had labeled as impossible. His ship had been damaged, but he had continued fighting with a determination that seemed almost insane. Back on Earth, Admiral Blake was implementing something she called asymmetric warfare doctrine. If humans couldn't match alien technology, they would have to fight in ways the aliens couldn't predict or counter. "I want every unconventional warfare specialist we have," she told her staff. "Bring me the people who think outside the box, the ones who break rules and find solutions that shouldn't work." Sergeant Amy Rodriguez was one of the first officers called to the emergency briefing. The Special Forces veteran had spent her career learning how to fight enemies with superior equipment and training. Her specialty was making the impossible seem routine. "The aliens expect us to fight like a conventional military," Blake explained to the assembled officers. "They have shields that stop our bullets and weapons that cut through our armor, but they're thinking like galactic soldiers. We need to think like humans." Colonel Kevin Park nodded as he studied the alien footage. "They're used to fighting other advanced species. Their tactics are designed for enemies who follow the same rules they do." "Exactly," Blake replied. "We don't follow their rules, we make our own." The plan that emerged from that meeting would have horrified any galactic military strategist. Instead of trying to match alien technology, the humans would use improvised weapons, environmental advantages, and coordinated attacks that ignored conventional military wisdom. On Mars, the alien reinforcements arrived to find a situation that was already spinning out of control. Human forces had established positions around the research station using equipment that seemed to appear from nowhere. Modified construction vehicles carried weapons that had been assembled from spare parts. Zexhai watched through the observation screens as human soldiers moved across the Martian surface. Their equipment looked crude and improvised, but they were using tactics that made no sense according to galactic military doctrine. "So they're not following standard assault patterns," he reported. "They're using the terrain in ways that our tactical computers can't predict." Morthick studied the displays with growing frustration. The humans were supposed to be primitive, but they were demonstrating tactical flexibility that rivaled some of the galaxy's most advanced military forces. "It doesn't matter," he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Superior technology always wins in the end." But privately, Morthic was beginning to wonder if he had underestimated the human capacity for adaptation. The species that had been described as emotional and predictable was showing signs of military innovation that he had never encountered. The first coordinated human attack came at dawn. Martian time teams, led by officers like Lieutenant Maria Santos and Sergeant Nick Thompson, struck simultaneously from multiple directions, using weapons that seemed to have been built specifically to counter alien defensive systems. The attack lasted only minutes, but when it was over, 2 alien soldiers were dead, and the research station's outer defenses had been compromised. The humans had accomplished something that should have been impossible with their primitive technologies. Exi stared at the damage reports and felt something he had never experienced in combat before: uncertainty. The humans were not following the rules, and their refusal to accept defeat was beginning to look less like stupidity and more like genuine military capability. For the first time since arriving on Mars, he began to wonder if his unit might actually be in real danger. The siege of the research station began on a Tuesday morning when Colonel Tony Marshall received clearance for what Earth Defense Command was calling Operation Red Planet. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Human forces would surround the alien base and cut off all communication with their fleet. Lieutenant Maria Santos sat in the back of a converted mining vehicle as it rolled across the Martian surface toward the research station. Her cyber warfare equipment had been cobbled together from civilian electronics and military hardware in ways that would have made her instructors proud. "Remember, people," Colonel Marshall's voice crackled through the radio, "these aliens have never faced an enemy that fights dirty. We're going to show them what humans do when we're backed into a corner." The first phase of the attack was a complete communications blackout. Maria's improvised jamming equipment flooded the airwaves with electronic noise that made it impossible for the aliens to contact their ships in orbit. The technique was crude but effective. Inside the research station, Zexai watched his communication screens dissolve into static. The sudden loss of contact with the orbital fleet was more terrifying than any weapon the humans had used so far. Galactic military doctrine assumed constant communication with command structures. "Sir, all channels are being jammed," Vorth reported, his insect-like mandibles clicking with stress. "I cannot reach the fleet or even our patrol ships." Captain Morthic felt something he had not experienced in 20 years of military service: genuine fear. The humans had cut his force off from reinforcement and supply lines using technology that should not have been capable of such precision. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Their equipment is primitive. It appears they have modified civilian electronics to create a wide spectrum jamming field," Vorth replied. "The technique is crude but surprisingly effective." Outside the station, human forces were taking positions using tactics that made no sense to galactic military observers. Staff Sergeant Nick Thompson led a team of soldiers who had trained as miners and construction workers before the war began. They knew how to use industrial equipment as weapons. "Set up the plasma cutters on the ridge," Nick ordered his team. "If those alien shields can stop bullets, let's see how they handle mining equipment." The industrial plasma cutters had been modified to operate at longer ranges than their designers had intended. The weapons were dangerous, unstable, and completely unpredictable, but they could cut through materials that conventional weapons could not. Tushexai watched through the observation screens as human soldiers positioned equipment that his tactical computer could not identify. The devices looked like construction tools, but they were being used in ways that suggested military applications. "What are they doing?" he asked Sergeant Major Clicks. The reptilian soldier studied the displays with growing confusion. "I cannot determine their tactical purpose. The equipment appears to be civilian grade, but they are positioning it like artillery." The human attack began at sunset, when the modified plasma cutters opened fire on the alien defensive screens. The beams were not as clean or precise as proper military weapons, but they created interference patterns that made the shields flicker and weaken. Private First Class Rachel Kim was operating one of the plasma cutters when she noticed something important. Colonel, the alien shields are having trouble with multiple frequency attacks. She reported, if we hit them from different angles with different energy types, they can't maintain stable coverage. Marshall smiled grimly at the report. Human ingenuity was proving more valuable than advanced technology. The aliens had shields designed to stop proper military weapons, but they were struggling against improvised tools used in unexpected ways inside the station. The alien soldiers were experiencing something they had never trained for. The constant barrage of different energy types was overloading their defensive systems and forcing them to constantly adjust their shield frequencies. Sir, the defensive screens are at 60% efficiency, HFY reported. The human weapons are creating harmonic interference that our systems cannot fully compensate for. Morthic stared at the tactical displays. In disbelief, the humans were using construction equipment and modified civilian electronics to compromise military-grade defensive systems that had been designed to stop the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. This is impossible, he muttered. They are using tools, not weapons, but the siege was just beginning. The humans had surrounded the research station with a ring of improvised fortifications and modified equipment that created a zone of constant harassment. The aliens found themselves trapped in a facility that was slowly being torn apart by enemies who refused to follow proper military procedures. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez led a team of soldiers who had been trained in urban warfare tactics. They moved through the Martian landscape, using techniques designed for fighting in cities but adapted for the alien environment. Remember, these aliens expect us to charge their positions like proper soldiers, she told her team. Instead, we're going to make them paranoid. We hit them from unexpected angles and disappear before they can respond. The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical attacks. The alien soldiers had been trained to fight conventional battles with clear objectives and defined tactics. The humans were conducting a campaign of constant harassment that made it impossible to predict where the next attack would come from. HFY found himself jumping at every sound and shadow. The humans seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Their attacks came from directions that the tactical computers said were impossible to approach from. Sir, I cannot maintain accurate sensor readings. Vorth reported, the human jamming equipment is creating false contacts and phantom readings throughout the area. The siege continued for 6 days and nights. During that time, the human forces demonstrated a level of tactical creativity that horrified the alien soldiers. They used everything from modified farming equipment to improvised explosives made from cleaning supplies. On the 4th day of the siege, HFY watched helplessly as Sergeant Major Clix was killed by a human sniper using a weapon that appeared to be a modified hunting rifle. The shot had come from a position that should have been impossible to reach, and the weapon had somehow penetrated Clix's personal armor. How did they get past our perimeter sensors? Morthic demanded. Sir, the humans appear to be using natural terrain features to mask their movement, HFY replied. They are not following standard approach patterns. The loss of Clix was devastating to unit morale. The reptilian soldier had been considered invincible by his fellow troops. His death proved that human weapons could kill galactic soldiers despite their technological advantages. By the 6th day of the siege, 8 members of the original alien unit were dead, and the survivors were showing signs of what human psychologists would recognize as combat stress. The constant harassment and unpredictable attacks had broken down their ability to function as an effective military force. HFY stared at the tactical displays and realized that his unit was no longer fighting a primitive species. They were fighting an enemy that had adapted to galactic technology faster than anyone had thought possible. The end came faster than anyone expected. Captain Morthic had been awake for 36 hours straight, watching his command fall apart around him. The human siege had broken something fundamental in his unit, and he could see the fear in every surviving soldier's eyes. Sir, we have lost contact with squads 3 and 5. Specialist Dorth reported, his voice shaking. The humans have breached the outer perimeter in 4 locations. Morthic stared at the tactical display where red warning lights showed human forces advancing from multiple directions. The research station that had seemed like an impregnable fortress a week ago was now a death trap surrounded by enemies who fought like demons. How many do we have left? He asked. 12. Sir, Zexhai replied, and half of those are wounded. The numbers were devastating from 36 elite soldiers. They had been reduced to barely a squad. The humans had accomplished something that should have been impossible with their primitive technology. They had defeated a superior galactic force through sheer determination and tactical innovation. Outside the station, Major Paul Anderson was leading the final assault. His special operations team had been modified with experimental equipment that pushed human technology to its absolute limits. The powered armor they wore was crude compared to alien gear, but it was designed specifically to counter the weapons they had studied. Remember, we want prisoners, Anderson told his team through. The radio intelligence needs to know how their technology works. The idea of taking prisoners was something that had never occurred to the alien soldiers in galactic warfare. Defeated enemies were either executed or enslaved. The concept of showing mercy to opponents was completely foreign to their military training. Inside the station, Morthic was making a decision that would define the rest of his career. The pressure of command and the constant fear had pushed him beyond rational thought. He activated a weapon system that had been forbidden by galactic law for over a century. Sir, what are you doing? Zexhai asked when he saw the weapon signatures on his screen. Ending this, Morthic replied, if the humans want to fight like animals, we will treat them like animals. The area effect weapon was designed to eliminate entire population centers. It would kill every human within a 50-kilometer radius, including the civilian settlement that had been established near the research station. The weapon violated every treaty and convention that governed galactic warfare. Zehe stared at his captain in horror. Sir, that weapon is prohibited the civilian population. The civilians are supporting military operations, Morthic snapped. They are legitimate targets, but Zexhai knew that was not true. The human settlement contained families and children who had nothing to do with the war. The weapon would kill thousands of innocent people and violate every principle that galactic civilization claimed to represent. I cannot allow this, sir, Zexhai said quietly. What happened next would be debated in military academies for generations. Zexhai drew his sidearm and pointed it at his commanding officer while Specialist Dorth and Private Hector moved to support him. The alien unit was tearing itself apart. Just as the humans breached the final defensive line, stand down, Lieutenant Morthic ordered. That is a direct command. No, sir, Zexhai replied. I swore an oath to protect innocent life. This weapon violates everything we claim to represent. The confrontation lasted only seconds, but it provided the opening that Major Anderson's team needed. The humans burst into the command center just as the alien soldiers were pointing weapons at each other. Drop your weapons, Anderson shouted in broken alien language that his team had learned from intercepted communications. The scene that followed was unlike anything in galactic military history. The humans disarmed the alien soldiers without killing them. They provided medical care to the wounded and treated their prisoners with a level of respect that confused and amazed the survivors. Captain Jennifer Walsh arrived with the medical team and immediately began treating wounded aliens using techniques that had been developed specifically for non-human physiology. The humans had studied their enemies not just to defeat them, but to save them. Why are you helping us? Zexhai asked through a translation device. Because the war is over, Walsh replied. You are prisoners now, not enemies. The concept was difficult for the alien soldiers to understand. In their experience, defeated enemies were either dead or enslaved. The humans seemed to have a third option that involved medical care and protection from Harmorthek. Was restrained and sedated after attempting to activate the forbidden weapon. The human medical team diagnosed him with what they called combat stress reaction, a condition that alien military medicine had never recognized. Your captain is sick, Dr. Helen Carter explained to Zexhai. The stress of command and the fear of defeat broke his mind. We can treat him, but it will take time. Zexhai looked around the command center that had been his home for the past month. Human soldiers were carefully cataloging alien equipment while medics treated wounded prisoners. The scene was surreal in its gentleness. You could have killed us all, he said to Anderson. Yes, we could have, the major replied. But what would that accomplish? We are not animals, Lieutenant, we are human beings. The distinction was lost on Zexhai at the time, but it would become important later. The humans did not fight because they enjoyed violence, they fought because they had been forced to defend themselves. When the threat was neutralized, they immediately returned to their natural state of compassion. The final tally was devastating for the alien force. Of the original 36 soldiers, only 4 had survived. The human casualties had been proportionally higher, but their society seemed to absorb the losses without breaking. As HFY was led away to the prisoner facility, he looked back at the research station that had become a symbol of human military capability. The crude metal structures looked the same as when his unit had first arrived, but everything else had changed. The humans had proven that advanced technology was not enough to guarantee victory. They had shown that determination, creativity, and the willingness to sacrifice could overcome almost any advantage. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. In his final report before capture, HFY wrote something that would become famous in military circles across the galaxy. We came to observe a primitive species and instead discovered something that may be more dangerous than any weapon we possess. The humans refused to accept defeat. The siege was over, but the real war was just beginning. The humans had won their first battle against galactic forces and proven that they could not be conquered through conventional means. The implications of that victory would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The prisoner facility was unlike anything HFY had expected from what the galactic intelligence reports had called a primitive species. The humans had converted an old mining complex into a detention center that provided medical care, comfortable living quarters, and even entertainment systems for their alien captives. Dr. Helen Carter arrived at the facility 3 days after the siege ended, carrying equipment designed specifically for treating non-human physiologies. The xenopsychologist had spent her career studying alien behavior, but this was her first chance to interact with actual galactic species. "How are you feeling, Lieutenant?" she asked. HFY through the translation device. "Confused," he replied honestly. "Your people could have executed us according to galactic military law. Instead, you provide medical care and comfortable quarters. Why?" Helen smiled in that way humans had when they were about to explain something they considered obvious. "Because you are not our enemies anymore. You are prisoners of war, and we have rules about how prisoners should be treated." The concept was difficult for HFY to understand. In galactic warfare, captured enemies were either enslaved or executed depending on their potential usefulness. The idea that prisoners had rights and protections was completely foreign to military doctrine. "What will happen to us?" he asked. "That depends on the peace negotiations," Helen replied. "The Galactic Fleet has agreed to a ceasefire and both sides are talking about prisoner exchanges." HFY felt a surge of surprise. The humans had actually forced the mighty Galactic Fleet to negotiate. A species that had achieved faster than light travel only 5 years ago had compelled the combined military forces of dozens of worlds to treat them as equals. Through the facility's windows, HFY could see human society beginning to recover from the war. The same soldiers who had fought with terrifying effectiveness during the siege were now working alongside civilians to rebuild damaged infrastructure. Sergeant First Class Alex Turner was one of the guards assigned to the alien prisoners. The young soldier had lost 3 friends during the fighting, but he treated the captives with professional courtesy that amazed them. "Do you hate us?" HFY asked him during one of their conversations. Alex considered the question carefully. "I hate that the war happened," he said finally. "I hate that people died on both sides, but I don't hate you personally. You were following orders just like I was." The ability to separate personal feelings from professional duties was something that impressed all the alien prisoners. Human soldiers seemed capable of fighting desperately during battle and then treating their former enemies with compassion once the fighting stopped. Specialist Monica Davis was another guard who spent time talking with the alien prisoners. She had been trained as a communications specialist, but her real talent was for understanding different cultures. "Your people think we are violent," she said to HFY one afternoon, "but we only fight when we have to. We prefer to build things and explore and learn about the universe." "Then why are you so effective at warfare?" he asked Monica. Thought about the question for a long time. "Maybe because we understand what we are fighting for," she said. "We know what we could lose, so we fight harder to protect it." The insight was profound in ways that HFY would not fully understand until Much later, human military effectiveness came not from advanced technology or superior training, but from emotional investment in the outcome. They fought harder because they had more to lose. General Robert Chun arrived at the facility to conduct formal debriefings with the alien prisoners. The experienced officer had fought in several Earth wars, but the conflict with galactic forces had taught him things about human nature that he had never considered. Your military doctrine assumes that superior technology guarantees victory, he said to Zexai during one of their sessions, but technology is just a tool. The people using it are what matters. But your weapons were inferior to ours, Zexai protested. Our weapons were different. Chun corrected, we used tools designed for our specific situation instead of trying to match your technology directly. The general pulled up footage from the siege showing human soldiers using modified civilian equipment to defeat alien military hardware. The images demonstrated tactical creativity that had impressed military analysts around the world. This is what we call asymmetric warfare, Chun explained. When you cannot match your enemy's strengths, you find ways to exploit their weaknesses. Colonel Sandra Lee was responsible for the prisoner exchange negotiations. The diplomat had been working with galactic representatives to establish protocols for future interactions between humans and alien species. The war is officially over, she announced to the alien prisoners. Your fleet has agreed to withdraw from the Sol system and formal peace talks will begin next month. The news should have been cause for celebration, but Zexai felt only uncertainty. The galactic fleet had retreated from a single star system defended by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The implications of that retreat would ripple through galactic politics for decades. What happens to us now? Private Hector asked. You will be returned to your people, Sandra replied. But first, we hope you will help us understand each other better. The cultural exchange program that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human researchers worked with alien prisoners to develop better translation systems and communication protocols. The goal was to prevent future misunderstandings that could lead to war. During his final week in human custody, Zexai observed something that would influence his later testimony. The same species that had fought with desperate effectiveness during the war was now working tirelessly to build peaceful relationships with their former enemies. Commander Lisa Harper was the intelligence officer responsible for analyzing the lessons learned from the conflict. She spent hours interviewing alien prisoners about galactic military doctrine and technology. We want to understand how your people think, she explained to Zexai. Not so we can defeat you, but so we can work together. The distinction was important. Human military intelligence was focused on preventing future conflicts rather than planning for conquest. The concept of defensive rather than offensive intelligence gathering was another innovation that impressed the alien prisoners. The date for the prisoner exchange approached. Zexai realized that his time in human custody had changed him fundamentally. He had arrived on Mars as a confident soldier representing a superior civilization. He was leaving as someone who understood that superiority was not measured by technology alone. Will you tell your people what you learned here? Helen asked him during their final session. I will tell them the truth, he replied, that humans are not primitive and cannot be conquered through conventional means. The prisoner exchange took place at a neutral location in space. Both sides approached the meeting with careful protocol and mutual respect. The war had ended not with conquest, but with understanding. As Zexai prepared to leave the human facility, he looked back at the guards and staff who had become something like friends. The experience had taught him that enemies could become allies, and that the universe was more complicated than galactic doctrine suggested. The shuttle that would take him back to galactic space was waiting, but Zexai felt reluctant to leave. He had learned things about warfare and humanity that would influence the rest of his career, and he was not sure he was ready to face the questions that awaited him. The return journey to galactic space felt longer than the original deployment to Mars. Zexai sat in the prisoner transport watching the Sol system shrink behind them while trying to prepare for the questions that would greet him at home. He was one of only 7 survivors from a mission that had started with 36 elite soldiers. The debriefing facility on Kethmora Prime was exactly as he remembered it: sterile, white walls, efficient staff, and the kind of military atmosphere that had once made him feel comfortable. Now it seemed cold and impersonal after his time in human custody. Colonel Vextar was the intelligence officer assigned to conduct the formal debriefing. The veteran interrogator had processed survivors from dozens of military disasters, but never anything like the Mars incident. Tell me about human military capabilities, he began. Zexai looked at the recording devices and data screens surrounding him. The question seemed simple, but the answer was anything but he had spent months trying to understand what made humans so effective in combat. They do not fight like galactic species, he said finally. They adapt their tactics to each situation instead of following standard doctrine. Explained they used civilian equipment as weapons. They modified construction tools to defeat military-grade defensive systems. They treated the battlefield like a problem to be solved rather than a conflict to be won through superior technology. Colonel Vextar made notes on his datapad. The human ability to improvise had been mentioned in other survivor reports, but the implications were still being analyzed by military strategists. What about their psychological profile? Zexai paused before answering this. Was the question he had dreaded most. They are not primitive, so they are different. Their military effectiveness comes from emotional investment in the outcome. They fight harder because they have more to lose. The intelligence officer looked up from his notes. Emotional investment. You mean they allow feelings to influence tactical decisions? No, sir, they use emotions to motivate tactical innovation. They care about their fellow soldiers and their civilian population in ways that make them more effective, not less. The concept was difficult to explain to someone who had never experienced human military doctrine. Galactic soldiers were trained to suppress emotions because they were considered a weakness. Humans seem to use emotions as a source of strength. Tell me about their treatment of prisoners. This was the question that Zexai had been preparing for since his capture. The answer would challenge everything the galactic military believed about primitive species they treated. U.S. according to established protocols for prisoner care, he said. They provided medical treatment, comfortable quarters, and protection from harm. They even assigned staff to help us understand their culture. This is inconsistent with their battlefield behavior. No, sir, it is completely consistent. They fight to protect what they value, and they value the concept of treating enemies with dignity once the fighting stops. Colonel Vextar set down his datapad and looked directly at Zexai. Are you suggesting that humans are more civilized than galactic species? The question hung in the air between them. Zexai knew that his answer would be recorded and analyzed by military leaders throughout the galaxy. His response could influence how the galactic community approached future interactions with humanity. I am suggesting that humans represent a form of civilization that we have never encountered before. He said carefully, they combine tactical innovation with ethical behavior in ways that make them both effective warriors and honorable opponents. 2 weeks later, Zexai found himself standing before the Galactic Military Council in the Great Assembly Hall on Centauri Station. The most powerful military leaders in the galaxy had gathered to hear testimony from the Mars Survivors Fleet. Admiral Korthmak called the session to order. The purpose of this hearing is to determine the appropriate response to the human military threat. Based on survivor testimony, we must decide whether humanity represents a danger to galactic security. Zexai stepped forward to the testimony podium. The hall was filled with officers from dozens of species, all waiting to hear his assessment of human capabilities. Honored members of the council, he began. I have submitted detailed technical reports on human military innovations and tactical doctrine. But I believe the most important thing to understand about humans is not how they fight, but why they fight. He paused to look around the assembly hall at faces that represented the military elite of galactic civilization. Humans do not fight for conquest or glory. They fight to protect their families, their communities, and their way of life. This defensive motivation, combined with their capacity for innovation, makes them extremely dangerous opponents. Admiral Korthmak leaned forward in his seat. Are you recommending that we avoid future contact with humanity? No, sir, I am recommending that we treat them as equals. The human species has demonstrated that they cannot be conquered through conventional means. They have also shown that they prefer diplomacy to warfare when given the choice, the recommendation sent a ripple of discussion through the assembly hall. The concept of treating a primitive species as equals was unprecedented in galactic history. What is your assessment of long-term human development? Another council member asked Ujexi had thought about this question during his entire journey. Home. Humans will continue to develop technologically and militarily at a rate that exceeds galactic predictions. They will become a major power in this region of space within our lifetimes. The hearing continued for 3 days with testimony from all the Mars survivors. The final recommendation from the Council was unprecedented. In galactic military history, humanity would be offered full membership in the galactic community with all the rights and responsibilities that status entailed. 6 months later, Zexai received his new assignment. He was being transferred to the newly created Human Relations Department, where his experience would be used to help establish diplomatic and military protocols for dealing with the Sol system. The irony was not lost on him. The mission that had started as a simple observation of a primitive species had ended with him serving as a bridge between humanity and galactic civilization. His survival had come at the cost of understanding that the universe was far more complex than anyone had imagined. As he prepared for his new role, Zexai thought about the human soldiers he had fought against and the guards who had treated him with dignity during his captivity. Both groups had taught him that strength came not from technology or superior numbers, but from the willingness to fight for something worth protecting. The galaxy would never be the same after humanity's introduction to galactic politics. The species that had been dismissed as primitive had proven themselves to be innovator survivors and ultimately worthy of respecting. His final personal log entry as a combat officer, Zexai wrote the words that would become his legacy. I survived a human war and learned that survival sometimes means understanding that your enemies might be right.